Bienvenidos to the Bronze Titan podcast on YouTube. I'm your host, Benjamin Ramos of the Boricua Cuba Solidarity Project. Based here in New York City, I'm a longtime Boricua independent journalist and longtime Cuba Solidarity activist here in the Bronx. Welcome to the inaugural podcast of the Bronze Titan. This is a labor of love that we put together over the last couple of years. A long time ago, there used to be a group called the New York Cuba Solidarity Project, and one of our biggest projects was producing a newsletter that we used to give out called the Bronze Titan. So this is kind of like the rebooting, the reiteration of the Bronze Titan. And for those of you who may be asking why the name Bronze Titan, it's the translation of El Titán de Bronce, which was the nickname of this compañero right here in the background, the General Antonio Maceo Grajales, who was a revolutionary Cuban fighter against Spanish colonialism in Cuba. And his nickname was El Titán de Bronce, and that's where we get Bronze Titan. It's a wonderful, wonderful name. And this is, as I said before, it's a rebooting, a reiteration of that newsletter turned into the modern day podcast. So on today's inaugural podcast, I'm going to be speaking with Belkis Montes Almontes. She is a member of La Brigada Juan Rius Rivera Brigade of Puerto Rico. She was one of the sub-directors of this year's contingent. It's a brigade that leaves from Puerto Rico to Cuba to do a lot of work, a lot of wonderful solidarity work. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and, just talk about Cuba solidarity work in general. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the Bronze Titan, Belkis.
Hola, Benjamin. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Belkis, mira, look at my t-shirt. Puerto Rico, siempre con Cuba. This is beautiful. a classic Brigada de Puerto Rico t-shirt. So I had to wear it for you and for the first podcast.
I didn't wear my t-shirt of this year's brigade because it's so hot. And yeah, it's too hot here.
No, yeah, I'm sure all the sweat and all the work that you did in Cuba, yeah. You have to watch it a couple of times. So
yeah.
Belkis, tell us, for those folks who don't know what the Brigada is, what is La Brigada Juan Rius Rivera?
First of all, La Brigada Juan Rius Rivera, it's a project that stems from El Comité de Solidaridad con Cuba en Puerto Rico, which is the Committee of Solidarity with Cuba in Puerto Rico. They started traveling in mid-90s because of the Periodo Especial, which happened when the USSR fell. It's called the Special Period. And when a group went to Cuba for the first time, they decided to start doing it like yearly. And then I think it was 1991, 1992, they couldn't go, but afterwards they started going every year. And that's the brigade.
And what happens in Cuba? When the brigade goes, what happens in Cuba?
When we go to Cuba, it's a process that takes usually go around July. But when we start maybe September, October, what's the program going to be? What are we going to do? What's the theme this year? What do we want to people to take attention to? Que la gente se dé cuenta, take notice. And what we do is, first and foremost, is let people know why are we going to Cuba. Cuba, there's a blockade. Do you know about the blockade? People need things. What can we do for them? There's also the part that we want the people to meet with other Cubans and just experience the country. My experience, the first time that I went on 2016. I went just out of curiosity, and it was I was expecting to be scared because of what I thought I knew about Cuba from the propaganda and everything. But I think it's one of the places that I felt safest. And I learned so much of my country, Puerto Rico, while I was in Cuba. And the thing is, the brigade is a learning experience so that we can help our fellow Cuban brothers and sisters. And also, they've always helped us too. So it's a learning experience, and also to keep raising our voices against the blockade, and now that they're still on the terrorist list, so we want to take them out.
Absolutely.
That's what the brigade is about.
Just for our listening audience, I am a proud member of La Brigada Venceremos, the Venceremos Brigade, which is a project that has been going to Cuba for over 60 something years. And we get to meet with the Puerto Rican Brigade, which, as a Boricua from the diaspora, is nothing better than running into my cousins and friends and family that are from the island there. And we do a lot of work together. There's a lot of community service, there's a lot of painting and doing planting work and doing all of that.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of fun because, I mean, Cubans celebrate every day. Any day that ends with Y is a party for Cubans. So
Yeah.
it is wonderful to go there and to feel what freedom feels like. To feel what
Yes.
freedom feels like, especially from the Boricua context where, you know, we don't live under a inhuman blockade. We live under U.S. colonialism, which is a very different
Yes.
animal, yet different animal, but same kind of structure and same kind
Yes.
of
Yes.
experience. And of course, like any Boricua, if I'm gonna start doing something on Cuba, I gotta start from my country and the solidarity with
Yeah.
that I have friends that make fun of us and say, Boricuas, you have a way of politically making everything about you guys. And we're like, well, yeah, we're good at it. We know solidarity.
Oh,
You know?
yeah.
So tell me about this summer. Tell me about this summer. Going on the brigade this summer. What did you guys do? What did you guys experience? What did you guys see?
This year we spent 2 weeks, and we stayed at the CIHAM. I don't know if you've been there. I guess you've been there. Campamento Internacional Julio Antonio Mella, which is like a home away from home when we were in Cuba. And there actually was another brigade while we were there, the Jose Marti Brigade, which is a European brigade. And we had different programs, so we didn't always get to like estar juntos, like be together. We had a few conferences which were at the CIHAM that were really good about the blockade and the repercussions and like their look to the future, which is not very good if Trump wins. So they're expecting the worst case scenario. So there was those two conferences. We did the community work, voluntary work in the fields. Also, we went to visited museums where we also went. Let me get my paper here. There are some names. We went to the CNSX, which is translated to National Center of Sexual Education, and there we met with some people, experts that were discussing the new civil code and the things that they did, which was really avant-garde. We were all shocked. We were like, a few of the people that came with us in this brigade were members from the Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, and they asked a lot of questions, and they were saying like, you guys are like 20 years ahead, at least with this code. And they were really shocked how advanced it is. We also went to the UNIAC, which is the Cuban Writer and Artist Union, and there we had a conference about racism, which was also very interesting. So we do a mix of like community work, going and meeting with different experts on certain topics, how they're working things in Cuba, even though despite everything that they say. We also went, we went to see the Colmenita, which people loved. We were all so moved. This is my fourth time like in Cuba and watching the Colmenita, and the Colmenita came last year to Puerto Rico also, and we did a party for them and everything, and food, and they were so happy about it, and we were crying. I was crying. I'm always crying.
Belkis, let's tell people, what's La Colmanita? What is it?
La Colmenita is a program for kids. I believe it's like 4 to 18, and it's not. It can seem like what I can compare it to is like an after school program, but they can do whatever they want. It doesn't necessarily have to be like you're gonna get out of the Colmenita and become a singer, an actor. they have a different foundation, and kids can just be kids. And Tim, which is the leader, he was saying like some kids are very shy, and they do not want to participate, like in because they do obras de teatro, like and musicals and stuff like that. And some kids are very shy, but they can work backstage. They develop. You can do, and I don't. The words, I'm losing my words here, but like kids can develop their skills even front or back of the house in theater, musicals. They were singing, dancing, playing instruments. There was a girl with Down syndrome singing and dancing, pardon me. And it was just the potential that they see in the kids. No kid is restricted. They can just be. And you can see those children flourish. And it's the most moving thing. And we have such big problems here in Puerto Rico with the education department. They have a lot of resources, a lot of money, and you don't see that going with the kids unless a community takes a stand and they do their thing, and but the government nothing. And here the kids are the most important, and there are different groups of colmenitas throughout Cuba, and it's just beautiful, man. It's just beautiful, and it's very moving. There were men crying because they were
Yeah,
so
no,
moved and happy to see kids being so secure, singing, I don't know, and welcoming, because it's just pure feeling good. That's
no.
the only thing that I
It,
can express about it.
They're incredible. They've actually toured throughout the United States. I believe they've been in New
Yeah,
York City before. La Colmenita is just it's and I'm glad you bring it up because I think sometimes people think that brigades are just, we're going to political meetings and all we're hearing is
no,
propaganda. No, when we go on these brigades, we're meeting with teachers, we're meeting with high school students, we're going
yes,
around and talking to people from all levels of civil society. This isn't one
yes,
of those trips where you're going to be bombarded by propaganda. Like, no, the brigades,
no,
the Venceremos Brigade, the Pastors for Peace, Jose Marti, La Brigada Juan Rios Rivera, we explore all of Cuba. We meet with people.
yeah,
We have these wonderful exchanges. And then when we hear about
yes,
how these are national initiatives, I don't know any
yes,
national, and I work in education and I work in an after school. I don't know of anything that is a national priority that teaches, that brings, art and history and culture to kids on a massive level like Comanita. So I'm glad we're talking about it because it's a way of softening this idea that, when you go to Cuba,
yeah.
it's all political tourism and it's all propaganda. And it's like, no, you go
No,
on a brigade. Go ahead.
we also went to in Matanzas. There's a school called Pedro Albizu Campos,
Yeah.
and we
Mm,
went and we delivered some goods. We had notebooks and pencils and stuff that they would need for the new year, the new school year. And they did a show for us. Everywhere we go, we're received with music, welcomed. It's overwhelming sometimes because you don't expect it. I've been like, this is my fourth time in Cuba, but the first time it was really overwhelming. All the feeling that it's like you walk through the street and where are you from? Puerto Rico, hermano, like you're my brother instantly. It's just like that. And then finding out the brigade had already been to the school before. I think it's like 10 years ago or something. The brigade hadn't been there in a long time, but they have a school called Pedro Albizu Campos. It's like, so makes me feel so proud.
yeah, it's
And the thing
wonderful.
is, when I went to Cuba for the first time, that's another thing. I was, first of all, nobody in my family is pro independence. I would vote for what they would say. I learned politics and history of Puerto Rico in Cuba. So that trip changed my whole mindset and the way I look at the world now and the way I live life now and the decisions that I make. That trip impacted my whole life. And I'm so happy about that, and I'm so proud. And this I joined the comité. El comité I joined, I believe, was in 2020, and I this is a way of giving back. You know, letting everybody know this blockade is not what they make you think it is. The people in Cuba, they're suffering, but not because of the government. It's because of the U.S. government and
And
all of the restrictions that they impose.
exactly. Like I want to get into that because you said something very significant. You went to La Escuela Don Pedro Alisu Campos and you had to bring notebooks and pens and pencils. So why? Why are we bringing that type of material aid to Cuba? Why?
Because that isn't something that they can actually buy. It's not like they have a it. I mean, some people when they go to Cuba, they are like, "We're telling you, bring what you need, what you usually use at your house, because there won't be a Walgreens, there won't be a Walmart. It's not readily available, you know, and they don't have the means that those types of materials aren't there. They have like difficulties to get like prime materials, medicines, and stuff like that. Um, like I'm guessing you know, but for the people that don't know, when the pandemic hit, Cuba was the only country in Latin America that made their own vaccine. They make their own vaccine, but they didn't have needles. So the La Red Continental, all of the Cuba's friends in this hemisphere, they joined and made a campaign, and we actually managed to get those needles that they needed so they could vaccinate the population. So even the most basic thing, it's a struggle to get in Cuba.
And it's the U.S. blockade. It's the U.S.
Yes.
creating an economic stranglehold on the people of Cuba, making it very difficult for Cuba to trade with other countries, next to impossible if
Yes.
it isn't third party trading. It's this
Yes.
economic stranglehold that, like again, just like I said in my intro, a blockade that has been internationally denounced as a form of inhuman torture, unnecessary, something that doesn't work. And people just don't sometimes don't understand. They blame the Cuban government. This is the fault of the
Yes.
Cuban government. And it's like,
Yes.
no, it's the fault of the government you belong to that's creating this situation in
Exactly.
Cuba. Despite the fact that the Cubanos have an incredible capacity for creativity and
Yes.
survival. And there's a lot
Yes.
of, yeah, I'm glad you talked about the agujas because there's various campaigns in future podcasts we're going to be talking about the pacemaker campaigns and all this other
Mm.
stuff that's taking place because this blockade is taking away human life. This blockade is making
Yes.
it extremely impossible for people to survive. And people say, well, people are
Yeah.
running out of Cuba all the time because it's so horrible. Well, it's horrible because of economic situations, which is the same thing that's happening in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is being,
Exactly.
people are hemorrhaging out of the island. ¿Por qué? Because of economic policies made by La Junta, which was instilled there by the U.S. government. So, and just the history of 126 years of colonialism in Puerto Rico, which has created that type of stuff. Belkis, as
Yes.
we're ending and wrapping up, why is it so important that not only Boricuas, but we're Boricua focused, but Boricuas and other people, other nationalities, other folks, peace loving people around the world, justice and revolutionary forces around the world. Why is it so important to stand in solidarity with Cuba?
Cuba, despite all of the the things that they have in the way that don't let them advance, they have despite that, and they've helped through supporting other countries with the sending doctors, sending support in disasters. So anybody who's against social injustice or injustice in general really has to support Cuba. I think, period. It's incredible. We were at the While we were in Cuba, we also had power outages. We had, and there's also the shortage of fuel. I mean, everything is just like 100 times harder, 100 times harder. while you're there. Because I mean, I live in Puerto Rico and we do struggle. It's a different animal, but I mean, it's just anybody who's against social injustice should be like getting the word out. This is unfair. This is inhumane. It's a genocide too. And also, there's a documentary that they showed us at the CIHAM. It's called Culpables, that they made a case last year in the, I believe is the Hague, showing all the evidence that the blockade is inhumane and all the repercussions of the blockade in the Cuban people. So I really, I think it's available online. It's called Culpables. If anybody can look it up, I think it's a mixture of different languages. It's also in English, but that will give you like an idea, because actually a judge determined that, yeah, the U.S. is guilty. It is guilty
A
of what they're
U.S.
doing to Cuba people for more than 60 years.
Mhm. A U.S. judge that was joined by a lot of international judges and human rights organizations all over the world.
Exactly.
People, the U.S. likes to create this media and this culture where the whole world is denouncing Cuba and the whole world sees what's really happening in Cuba, and it's always the opposite. It's always it's never what the U.S. and their friends and the media that they
Allies,
control
yeah.
and their allies say it is. And I say that, again, this year, a few months ago, there was that international vote. Well, not even a few months ago. It's about to be a year ago this
Hmm.
October. Another vote was had in the in the United Nations about whether
Mm,
this blockade should exist, and close to 200 countries always vote against this blockade, and it's
yeah.
the U.S. and Israel and a couple of little allied
That
countries here and
abstain,
there,
yeah.
yeah, that either abstain or vote against. And it's
Yeah.
there's truth in numbers. There's truth in numbers. You have nearly 200 countries, many of whom
And
have
if
their own relations with Cuba, saying this blockade does not work. It's inhuman and unnecessary. That's something that has to be listened to.
Yeah, and if really you want to prove your case by saying the government doesn't work, lift the blockade. Let the people decide. Let it live under regular conditions, and people will decide this doesn't work. We want you out. We don't want this type of government. That's the whole answer.
Hmm.
Why do you have to impose a blockade?
Yeah. Respect Cuba's sovereignty. Respect Cuba's
Exactly,
autonomy and
exactly.
its right
It's
to
not
self
your
determination.
place. Exactly, it's
Exactly.
not your place.
All right. So, familia, this has been your August edition of the Bronze Titan podcast. We'll be coming to you once a month. We may sneak in an extra podcast in August. A lot of what Belkis and I were talking about are going to be future podcast topics. We're going to be talking more about the blockade. We're going to be talking about the vote in October that's coming up at the United Nations. We're going to be talking about the pacemaker campaigns. And I'm going to talk to a lot of people who've gone to Cuba, not just from La Brigada Juan Rios Rivera. I'm going to have some folks from the Venceremos Brigade here, from the Mayday Brigade, from the Jose Marti Brigade, the Ernesto Che Guevara Brigade. So we're going to be talking to a lot of people that are going to Cuba to see Cuba for itself. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias a mi hermana nueva, Belkis. Thank you so much, Belkis, for being with
Thank
us
you for
today.
having me.
We'll
Thank
always be able to
you.
we'll always be able to say two Boricuas launched this Cuba education podcast. So thank you as well to our listening audience. You're watching this on YouTube, on a YouTube channel called the Bronze Titan Podcast. I want you to like this podcast. I want you to share it, and I want you to subscribe and put on notifications so that when we produce our podcast once or twice, again, I may sneak in an extra podcast in about 2 weeks, but definitely once a month, you'll get that notification and you know to listen in. So please subscribe to the channel, and como siempre, Cuba sí, bloqueo no.
Okay or no?